Mindy. I'm the project manager of our 5th Information Security Summit, Spotlight on Cloud. We have here Mr. Resham, professional member of International Association of Privacy Professionals. Hi, Mr. Resham. Welcome.
Good morning.
All right. First thing first, what are the topics that you were presenting later?
Today I'll be talking about information security, privacy, and the cloud. And it's about relation of how today when we have the cloud technology and how it affects privacy in terms of personal identifiable information and our obligations to the laws in the country. And it also needs to differentiate that information security and information privacy are not necessarily the same thing. It may sound the same, it may cover similar aspects, but it's a bit different when it comes to your obligations and what happens when the data moves on to the cloud.
But roughly, what's the difference? Because when you tell me that information security, information privacy, I'll feel that, okay, it's the same thing. But how different is it?
It is quite different in the sense that information security is more about technology, it's more about how you can secure things. You need information security to assure and to be privacy compliant, but privacy is more in terms of the data that you hold, the kind of data that you hold, how you're collecting it, how you're using it, how it's being stored in the cloud, what's your obligation to the individual who has the data. And personal data does not only cover consumer data, but all the organizations who have employees are also responsible to keep their employees' data safe. And with things like online payroll and cloud-based payroll and CRM systems, we need to protect such data. So info security is a means, but privacy is more of a process, it's more of a concern on how to manage this data and what is the obligation. Right? A lot of times when we work with cloud providers or we appoint services and take services from the cloud providers, we talk about uptime, we talk about scalability, we talk about everything, but we don't give them in writing their obligations in a data breach. We don't give them in writing their obligations to keep the data private. But the company itself who puts the data on the cloud is always responsible for that and it's always accountable. So these are things that I'll cover today in terms of what can be done to mitigate such risks.
But what can be done to mitigate such risks?
So things like legal documentation. So when you have a contract signed with a provider, what is their obligation? What is your obligation? What risk are you transferring to them? What risk can you avoid? What is their commitment to providing the service to you? Because today in infrastructure, in cloud infrastructure, you have infrastructure as a service, you have platform as a service, you have software as a service. And across these three major components of cloud computing, there are different responsibilities that lie with different people. Right? At the end of the day, if there's a data breach, obviously the company that puts its data on the cloud is responsible. So legal documentation is one. The second thing we have is privacy enhancing technologies. We call them PETs. These are technologies such as encryption, loss prevention, security that also encompass it to ensure that when it comes to personal identifiable information online, it is protected and it's kept probably separate or in a hybrid or private cloud for that matter. And the third thing is also that a very key component of privacy today is something called privacy by design. Today we have a lot of mobile apps, online apps that all start from the application level. At the application level, when someone's building an app, there's something called privacy by design. It is seven principles, foundational principles that are important when creating an application or cloud service that needs to be incorporated from the beginning. When you create something, privacy should be a component that you think of, and that's how you build it accordingly. So that's something when it comes to service providers, when it comes to even organizations who build their own programs, their own apps, their own process workflow, privacy should always be there from the beginning and not an afterthought. Yes.
Okay, I'm just curious, the Personal Data Protection Act in Malaysia, how did it affect cloud?
So for PDPA in Malaysia, they're one of the first in Southeast Asia region to have the PDPA. And in Malaysia, it's more strictly, there's more strict guidelines and more strict penalties as well. So there's a jail term and fines that follow any privacy breach. It affects the cloud because it doesn't matter where the data is. Companies are responsible for the kind of data that it uses and how it uses the data. So if you can put the data on a cloud service and keeping it there, but if that data is breached, the company is responsible. And for example, the most common thing that we see is that part of PDPA is how the data is stored and retained and disposed of. A lot of times when we sign contracts with the cloud providers, we do not ask what happens to your data when we terminate the contract or when our contract ends. When we do something in-house, we degauss our hard disks. We send out the hard disks for shredding. But when it comes to cloud service providers, does the same thing happen? Do we ensure it happens? How can we verify it happens? And all this is part of accountability and obligations when it comes to Personal Data Protection Act. Because at the end of the day, if I'm not wrong, the last number registered with the Personal Data Protection Council, there are 45,000 organizations in Malaysia who have registered as holders of personal data, which is still too little, because if you consider employee data, personal data, then there's a lot more that still can be done. But in terms of 45,000 that are registered today, let's assume 30-40% have data on the cloud. And what are they doing to ensure that their data is secure? How can they ensure that their legal obligations, their obligations to the law is not affected by the cloud? And so these are the various methods. And the PDPA definitely is a legislation that pushes some thought process into the privacy situation, but it's definitely a good step forward, because next year when Malaysian companies or companies around the world do business with Europe, there are new Europe data protection guidelines that come into play. And those guidelines actually say that if you're not adequate in terms of your data protection adequacy, in terms of following similar obligations, then you will not be allowed to transfer data to or from Europe. So I think that is a big change, and they are looking to enforce it quite strictly as well. Yeah.
Okay, and one more thing is, do you agree that there are certain data that we should not move to cloud?
So the definition of cloud is something that's clustered together, together. But there are different models of the cloud. There's the private cloud, the public cloud, the hybrid model, stuff like that. So I think private cloud is essential, because private information, you can keep it in the private cloud. You have full control over it. It just pulls your resources and puts everything together. You have full control, you have better management. So private data should remain on the private cloud. But if you look at today's world, where we're using Uber, we're using a lot of other services as a consumer, that data goes through the cloud, public cloud anyway. So whether you choose private cloud, hybrid, or the public model, it's important that we secure it, and we monitor the providers so that we know what's happening, rather than saying that, oh, this data, we'll never put your MyCard number online. But if there are certain things that you register for, that you put your MyCard number, then it goes online, like it or not. So that's something we companies can do to ensure.
All right, the last question. With cloud, how do you think the role of CIOs or CTOs in companies is going to change?
I think CIOs and CTOs, originally their role was more on processes, more on technology, making sure you're up to date. But I think with things moving to the cloud, they're more like managers of systems, concepts, managers of security and privacy as a whole. It's their strategy thinking encompasses end to end. It's no longer the IT part is the IT department, because the IT is now part of the business process. It's part of how data is collected, data is used, and stuff like that. So I think with this cloud computing, the CIOs and CTOs have to plan long term. They have to put strict guidelines. Companies today have vision, mission, but their privacy policy and their information security policy is usually lacking, and they should be enhanced. I think their role should be to enhance this, because at the end of the day, you have your end users, you have your IT department doing activities, right, carrying out activities which can affect the security, privacy, and in fact, sometimes in certain situations today, the entire operations of the whole company. So it's very essential that they promote security, privacy as part of their daily activity and create awareness. I think just handling information and giving technology is not enough. It's the awareness and the top-down approach to highlight the importance of security and privacy, because at the end of the day, they're not going to do anything. They can only strategize and plan. The hands that work are way below them, and they need to ensure that the whole process is from top to down is about privacy, security, and the responsibility of the company.
All right, thank you so much for your time, Mr.
My
Resham.
pleasure.
I wish you a fruitful conference.
Thank you. Thank you very much.